1 week later, how do you feel about this season of House of the Dragon?
Your feedback plus book spoilers, which will be more disturbing?
And which listener will win the Joffrey Podcast Grand Prize for Season 2 of House of the Dragon?
All that and more on this special season wrap-up podcast of the
Joffrey of
Podcast. I'm very busy. Many important matters require a king's attention. I'm king now. King now. I am king. I am kiss it. Kiss it again when I return. Your fingers or your king doesn't discuss your battle plan. Stupid girl. Your fingers or your tongue. I am the king. I'm telling mother.
Welcome to the Joffrey Podcast. My name's Bubba. And with me, as always, is someone who also, disappointingly, ends early. It's Catfish!
Ooh, Bubba, you've been talking to Ms. Catfish. This is so exciting. Bubba,
yeah.
This is except for our Lord Joffrey, which we did some bonus episodes on. This is the first time we're doing like a super, like end of the season kind of special bonus. We've done some preseason stuff, especially when HBO recognized us for the powerful influences we are and invited us to the early premiere of House of the Dragon season 1. You know what? I don't know. You know, one of the questions should have been, what was the bigger mistake they made, the way they ended the season, or not inviting Bubba and Catfish to the season 2 premiere? But we're going to break down the entire season 2. We've got a lot of feedback. Mostly why we're doing this is because you have been giving us great feedback this year, and we wanted to come and scoop up all the remaining feedback off of the social media ground before it gets muddied by whoever wants to do a live interview on it. And we're going to be reading all that. And Bubba, you are going to do some book spoilers. That's very exciting.
We're going to talk about if there are only 2 more seasons, and they announced that after we did our last podcast, that there are only 2 more seasons of House of the Dragon. If you know the stories for the books, how could you wrap up this series in 16 more episodes? We're going to discuss that and book spoilers later on, but we'll give you fair warning before we get into it.
Bubba, you know what? I was reading something else that a little, maybe in particular, I may have spoiled myself a little bit, but they had a good explanation. They said, how are they going to get through it? Nothing but bangers, Bubba. It's going to be banger after banger, episode after episode. Bubba, I spoiled myself. There's some amazing things that are going to be happening here. Shocking.
There will be. But hey, before we get to that speculation stuff, we always rate the episodes, but now let's rate the seasons. How do you feel? It's been a week later. How do you feel about season 2, now a week later, sitting with it, of House of the Dragon?
Well, Bubba, I got to say, that was, we always say it's our initial response. We do the podcast right afterwards. So sometimes you sit there and you go, oh, well, let's see. I gave it a rating, but then as we talked about it, it's like, well, you know what? That seemed a lot better than what I said. Or, you know what? I gave it a high rating, but I had a lot of issues with it. Bubba, I got to say, since everyone in my life knows Catfish, he's the person I go to with my comments and questions about House of the Dragon because of the great Joffrey Podcast. Bubba, I had someone ask me my feeling about the season finale. I gave it a thumbs down. They said hard agree. Our good friend, the Black Kraken at Revere, Terry, listened to our last podcast, and he listened and he said 6 was too kind.
Whoa.
Bubba, I just got to say, I am still disappointed with this season. It's really just comes down to the end. Listen, if there's going to be a whole lot that's got to happen, I really feel like they should have ended this season with something big happening. When was the last time something big happened in this season? Was it episode 3? Was it episode 4? I mean, something really that set things into motion and was, if I can borrow someone's word, a paradigm shift.
Yes, well, that's where I want to get to. I think the season as a whole was good. I think certain episodes, for me, episodes 2, episodes 4, and even episode 7, had moments of perfection and greatness in it. I'm not sure any episode was perfect, but there were moments of greatness in this episode. If you had me just rate the final episode as an episode of TV, I would say, oh, that was good. It's just the expectation of a season finale is what hurt me, and that kind of does cast a little pall over the whole season. Now, the biggest thing I think about the season, and especially that last podcast, is how the double L's let me down, Catfish.
The double L's, Bubba.
Our loyal listeners.
Oh, don't be giving them a hard time, Bubba. How did they let you down?
I am. In that last podcast, which once again, we do spur of the moment immediately after the episode ends.
Yep.
Off the top of my frigging head, I listed every major event in Game of Thrones penultimate episode and final episode, and House of the Dragon penultimate episode and final episode. This wasn't like in show notes. It was all off the top of my head. Not one loyal listener said, "Oh my God, Bubba, way to recall all these things. That's incredible." Loyal listeners, I'm keeping the prize. No, I'm kidding. We're going to give you a prize. The feedback's been incredible. But Catfish, I decided to go back and really, even though I pulled it off the top of my head, I did look at the final episodes of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. And the one thing they all had is what you just mentioned. They all had a paradigm shift moment. It's like, okay, this changes our relationship with the world or our thoughts on the world or how people are going to react in the world very well. So Game of Thrones season 1, I mentioned it last week, the dragons are born. That is a paradigm shift in the show, and it did feel like a capping moment to the season.
Well, it definitely feels like something that would have affected Kristen Cole.
Right. Literally, if he had been there, he'd be like, game over, man. Now, season 2, maybe you don't feel it was a paradigm shift, but at the end of that season, episode 10 of season 2 of Game of Thrones, we have our first look at the White Walkers, and we see there's a giant army of them. Like in the first episode, we had seen a couple of them, but they were all kind of in shadows, and we had only seen a couple. Here, we see an army of the dead, so it's a paradigm shift. In season 3, maybe that's the one where you could say it doesn't end so much with a paradigm shift because the Red Wedding is the episode before. But what you would say is Daenerys, who had an army at the end of season 3, the final episode, episode 10, she has like all these people, all the slave people that she had freed. She had like a civilization to herself. Season 4, Tywin Lannister being killed, like the major power person in King's Landing is killed in the final episode. That's a paradigm shift. Season 5, Jon Snow is dead. That is a paradigm shift. Season 6, Cersei's queen, Jon Snow is king. Daenerys is finally sailing to Westeros. Those are paradigm shifts. Season 7, the wall is coming down. Season 8, the final season, the paradigm shift. Daenerys is dead. The war is finally over. House of the Dragon season 1, the Cold War is finally over. Luke was killed. Where is that paradigm shift in the final episode of season 2? Now, some people may say, well, hey, it's Daemon bent the knee to Rhaenyra. Is that a paradigm shift, Catfish?
No.
It feels like he had already done it. How about this? It's Team Green now has the Triarchy's naval support. Does that really feel like a paradigm shift or just like another piece getting on the board? Alicent giving up on her children. Maybe that's the paradigm shift. Or maybe it's King Aegon leaving the city. Nothing to me really felt like those other moments. And so, listeners, I always say, who cares what we think? We want to know what you think. But
well, Bubba, I just want to know, did you read that all over again just to really browbeat it into the listeners?
Yes, for once. If I don't get a tweet saying, oh, Bubba, way to go. That is impressive. So we're going to get to your feedback in a second. And we're going to hear people who completely disagree with us and their opinions are completely valid. They loved this final episode. And we're going to get to some feedback. Let's be honest, it's more like us. But again, your feedback, the way you feel is the most important thing. And we want to hear from you. We want you on the team with us. We've mentioned it before, but real quickly, if you only, we've mentioned it a lot before, but real quickly, if you only listen to the Joffrey podcast, we want you on everything we do. We're wrapping up our coverage of Babylon Berlin season 4. In 10 days from now, we're going to be releasing our podcast on Only Murders in the Building season 4. We're going to have Moonflower Murders in September, Silo season 2 in November, Skeleton Crew in December. Next year, we've got Andor season 2. Is that going to be good, Catfish?
All hail to the YES.
We're going to have The Terror, the anthology series 3. Is that going to be good, Catfish?
Maybe.
Kind of been 50% through the first 2 seasons. And we're going to cover the next Game of Thrones, A Song in Ice and Fire television series, Catfish, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Now, I want to ask you, I don't think, just to confirm, have you read any of the Dunk and Egg short stories?
I've read a few of those, but it's been a while.
Well, listeners, hopefully this isn't a spoiler, but if they stick to the way the stories are, listeners, how do you feel, Catfish? How do you and I feel about a Game of Thrones TV show without any dragons, without any living, breathing dragons, and without any White Walkers, Direwolves, some of the fantasy elements that we like so much? How do you think a show like that could do?
It's going to have to be real good, Bubba. It's going to have to be real good.
Yeah, I think the violence is going to have to go. The violence and sex position may have to go up to really, get that buzz that sadly this show sometimes gets from violence and sex position.
Thank you.
Now, Catfish, the one thing as we get to the feedback, the one thing I know is kind of tough to talk about, and that is people listen to our voices. They see us on YouTube and they go, these guys are so Generation Z. But the real podcast listeners are millennials, Catfish. That is the sweet spot to get to millennials. And so the one thing that I've noticed is that sometimes maybe our language isn't focused towards millennials. So I looked up millennials, how do they talk? And it turns out they've come up with their own curse words, their own swear words that kind of say, hey, if you say this, you're a millennial. So what we're going to do is we're going to list them right now. And then anytime in the podcast, we'll drop them in to show our millennial cred. Okay, you ready, Catfish?
Got it. So, yeah, sure. Let's
so the first one here is douche canoe and douche face.
Those sound mating. Yeah.
Twat waffle.
Okay.
Fuck trumpet.
Okay, I like that one.
Piss wizard. All right, how about you read these some more? Here,
all right, we've got tangular.
Yep.
Why isn't that tascular? Anyway, we've got ladle, cycle, wank hammer, and this last one sounds very British. Arse basket?
Arse basket, yeah. So as you can tell, we weren't reading those. We were just recalling how many times we've used those with our fellow millennials. So we're going to use that in the rest of this podcast so we could really focus on our target audience here, Catfish.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Don't be a wank hammer.
One time. Hey, somebody who's definitely all Gen Z is our wonderful listener, Camille at Harley Camille on X, as we millennials call it, Catfish. What did Camille say?
Camille said this would have been better as the second to the last episode. I'm annoyed that we have to wait so long until the next season. I would have rated it higher if it wasn't the finale. Hashtag Ulf sucks.
What? Any thoughts on that, Catfish? Any defending of Ulf you want to do?
You know what? The only great thing was Ulf is he really should be split out of this show. And you say the Dunk and Egg series doesn't have any dragons. Ulf should be flying into that show. I don't care when it's set. I need Ulf flying into that show. He belongs in that show.
He does. One of the biggest and best A Song of Ice and Fire follows on all social media platforms is our good buddy Patman23, Pat Spinagle.
I mean, when we went to the Game of Thrones con, he was on every panel.
He
Not
was.
every other panel, every panel.
Right. So Con of Thrones, we went to 2 of them, and Patman was the speaker everybody wanted because he knew everything. And what I love is Patman completely disagreed with our take on the finale. And reading his feedback, he actually made me like the finale more. Patman said, I enjoyed the finale. I appreciate that there's a lot of analysis on what the producers could have done differently, or how they could have maybe squeezed more episodes out of HBO's budget. Or maybe they should have let episode 7 with our guy Ulf and Hugh getting dragons, be the finale. And he says he hears plenty of people say that, but he's just going to be honest. And I love it. He says, I liked what I saw in the episode. He's all in on seeing season 3 when it finally comes out in 2 years. He says, I've waited 13 years for the Winds of Winter book. Well, and counting, Batman, and counting. Yeah. He said the episode delivered. He said his wife, Miss Batman, gasped when Helena showed up in Daemon's dream, his crazy dream when he touched the weirwood. And he said he gasped when Bloodraven, the Targaryen there with the kind of birthmark on his face, he said the scene between Rhaenyra and Alicent was unexpected, but in a good way. Alicent is freaking offering to surrender King's Landing. He says, I'll make no comment about book knowledge, but he supports it. Oh, wow. He says Alicent is bargaining with her son's Aegon's noggin. And say Aegon's noggin, 3 times fast. That's tough. But Laris has already taken the royal head and rest of the body out of town. This is setting up great stuff, is what he says. 5 armies on the move. 3 expendable dragon riders who Rhaenyra doesn't have any problem sending into harm's way. 2 fleets on a collision course. He's really into it. He says, for people who demand that seasons have arcs, just like the Noah, he says, I don't talk to these boring people. Daemon,
oh, man.
I know. He says Daemon got an arc, Rhaenyra got an arc, Alicent got an arc. They all go on journeys and end up differently than they are at the beginning of the season. People act like that.
But Daemon's arc was more like one of those mazes.
A circle,
it
right.
kept going around and around and around and around.
Right. He says Catfish even remarked on the Team Black arc, where they started a man down, afraid to commit, and now they outnumber the Greens 7-2 in Dragons. He says, our beloved Otto has resurfaced in jail. And, that makes me sad. He says, cannot wait until season 3. The finale did a great job, and it gave me #the hype. Woo. Ooh.
He also said, it's okay if your mileage varies, ego te absolvo.
That is defending it perfectly. Listeners, if you agree with Batman, that's what we love. Everybody should have their own opinion of everything, and I love hearing that. Now, there's some people who admittedly agree with us, Catfish. What did some of these other listeners say?
All right, our good friend Dooley's left leg says, I was a little disappointed that we didn't get the payoff in an epic battle we've been promised all season.
Yep.
But it did tie up a lot of loose ends. It sets up perfect for next season. The Damon Weirwood scene alone made this episode very special, tying in the overarching A Song of Ice and Fire theme to both shows. Dooley also says, just started listening and spat out my lunch. Oh, we love a good spit take. Catfish's match game answer, best and worst of the season, jerking off in Allison's anger.
No, we don't have to relive it, Dooley.
He actually went there. Yes, I did. At spur of the moment, that's where the magic comes from. He said, thanks for another great season, guys. Can't wait to hear the follow-up episode 2. And you're listening to it right now, Dooley.
Thank you. But Dooley, let's never mention that match game answer again, please. What did our buddy Matt Link Hogthrob say, Catfish?
At Matt's Test Lab 1, unsatisfying.
Whoa.
Again, who's the editor this season? If they had to adhere to 8 episodes, then this should have been the penultimate episode. I kept looking at the remaining time thinking, oh, they left 15, 10, 5 minutes for fighting, then nothing. And still listening, but the fact that we got a wanking Westerosi's type reference within 10 minutes was a great distraction to my overall disappointment with the episode. Bubba, value added.
Catfish, I said we weren't going to mention it again. You mentioned it again in the next
it's
feedback.
Our listeners, they love it. And I love our listeners. Bubba Hanzo A said 6 out of 10 is way too kind. I never skipped an episode more than this one. And the woman-splaining was off the charts.
When that woman is Queen Rhaenyra and she has dragons, I just sit there and go, yes, keep explaining. I don't have a problem with it. Yes, Queen.
Oh my God. Let me read this. This is so good. Courtney Cherry 5582 imagines the season-long arc between Rhaenyra and Alicent. Rhaenyra,
okay.
I'm dressed up as a nun to ask for peace. Alicent, it's too late. Even if things were a misunderstanding, no peace. 2 weeks later, Alicent, hey girl, about that peace. Is it too late for my sons? But me and my daughter are cool, right?
Spoilers, Courtney Cherry. She did the whole season in 3 lines there. Now, Jesse C wrote us and said, I enjoyed the final episode well enough, but not as a season finale. It fell flat when you consider we have the 2-year wait. And boy, that is so funny. Everybody knows it's a 2-year wait. Admittedly, we kept mentioning on the podcast, but everybody knows this is 2 years. Now, Jesse continues, that said, I also heard HBO cut the season from 10 episodes to 8 episodes, pretty much right before they started kind of moving to the next step of filming. I suspect the showrunners had to make some last-minute changes as a result, which left us on a finale that had us on the brink of something.
Well, I'll disagree with her. It's on the brink of a lot of things, but that's what I wanted to ask you, Bubba. I heard that too. And so this was a kind of a very last minute thing that HBO did, in which case it's understandable, but also just a really dumb move by HBO.
Well, Catfish, there's something I think we need your expertise on, in that in the making of season 2, It was being filmed and shot during the WGA writers' strike, and weren't the SAG actors on strike too, or supporting the Writers Guild? And so the actors on House of the Dragon, I think they're in something called equity, so they were kind of able to keep filming, but maybe the actor who plays Otto is in SAG, so he couldn't, and that's why he's barely in 3 episodes. I mean, I don't know. What do you remember about last fall?
Well, I do remember that if you were SAG, that you didn't have to strike, but you could go along with it and support. Okay. And technically you couldn't get into trouble. I mean, you'd have to be someone like Otto to say, I'm doing it. But being in equity wouldn't matter. I mean, they're shooting over in London too, so I don't know what the screen union is, the television and film union is for London. That could have been a separate issue as well. But probably most of them are in SAG as well.
As I think anybody who pays any attention to the business pages knows, when Discovery Channel pretty much took over Warner Brothers, which is Time Warner, it used to be known as, which is what HBO is under. They did a lot of things. They renamed it from HBO Go to HBO Max to suddenly just Max. Like, there was a lot of things going on. And one of their cost-cutting moves was to cut the season down to 8 episodes. When exactly that hit, nobody knows for sure. But
that is the real question, because presumably, they're in the writer's room right now. And so if HBO hadn't told them before they went into the writer's room, then yes, they would have had to have made some adjustments for sure. Yeah, I mean, you also have to think they've got a budget limitation too. So also they have to say, well, we're going to hit this, and then we're just going to try to set everything up for the nonstop bangers of the next 2 years.
Nonstop bangers. We're currently recording this on August 14th of 2024. We hear that the season 3 is going to go into production early in 2025. So we shall see. Now, we have so much more feedback. We got to keep going on. Jillian wrote us this feedback, who said, it was the finale that never featured the babysitter who never was. So Rhaenyra was definitely the babysitter who never was like, okay, you guys go. I'm going to find my own dragon. Yeah. Tough.
And Gen X Cat Mom at Allmod Khan says, I want to so badly love it, but can't. Sorry, Pat, man. She didn't say that. 6.5 out of 10 for the episode, 8 out of 10 for the season. At Evers 02 said they should have done 3 to 4 years with the younger cast. It just seemed rushed now, like the last few seasons of Game of Thrones. So I wonder what you think now, Evers, that they got to wrap up the show in another 2 years.
Whoa. Jay Holt says, meeting Admiral Lohar when all the air leaked out of my balloon. Jay Holt continues, does wokeness really require everyone in charge always needs to be some kind of badass girl boss? Now, Admiral Lohar is directly from the book. So, that said, Martin is very liberal, it feels like. And to be honest, we had a couple more feedback talking about how they didn't like Admiral Lohar. And I have to be, I just would respond to people and say, the one thing about Admiral Lohar is those scenes with her in Thailand mud wrestling and, hey, have sex with my wives, those scenes had a lot of spice and juice and were interesting. So I don't, keep Admiral Lohar, let her rule at this point.
Absolutely. I found that was again, those were my best scenes of the episode. So, and that's a finale episode. So I'm pro Low.
Now, Catfish, let's go kind of big picture and something
okay.
Because we're always immediate reaction on our podcast.
Yeah.
We don't talk about this too much. When you and I, as we love to not so humble brag, that we were at the world premiere of House of the Dragon season 1. We were there. We saw it before anybody. Mm-hmm. But when we talked about it in our premiere coverage, we were both shocked that this show, this unique show, House of the Dragon, was tying so hard into the Ice and Fire prophecy and the White Walkers and the Game of Thrones storyline. And at the time we were like, why would you tie this show so hard to the Game of Thrones storyline? I think it comes directly from Martin, and we keep getting more and more hints that it did, if not hints, flat out statements. But that said, it keeps coming up in the show. It's not like this thing that kind of sort of ties in. I mean, the final episode of this season had Daemon, seeing White Walkers, seeing Dany with the dragons. How do you feel that this show keeps almost setting up the end game of the next series?
Well, I just know that I'm going to raise Patman's ire with this. They are using it to good effect. In other words, Rhaenyra's like, I have to do this because of the prophecy, but wouldn't she just want to do it normally?
Yeah.
I mean, if your father picks you, again, they leaned on a lot to make Daemon come back. But on the other hand, what they also leaned on for Daemon was, it sucks to be the ruler, right? So they could have just leaned more on that. And the fact is, none of this is really going to affect what happens 200 years from now. In fact, 200 years from now, the idea, there's the dragons are gone already, which is a quick time for them to go. So there's no discussion of like, well, gee, if we can only find some bums to ride the dragons, that'll be okay. But
where's our 200 year in the future Ulf? Is Jon Snow Ulf 200 years in the future?
Yeah. I kind of don't know what they get out of it. You really don't. I mean, I don't really see how it's going to affect what happens 200 years in the future. And let's let it be its own thing, like Better Call Saul was its own thing with everything else hanging over it. And that was,
that was a good prequel. Most people thought.
Yeah.
The one thing that
it was leading right to something, not like 200 years before something.
Well, I want to say that when we attended the premiere, I was the big one of like, why are they bringing this in? It seems so odd. That said, there are certain things I like about it. So I just want to go into this. And once again, if Patman, you disagree, if any listener disagrees, let us know. But one thing I do like about it is it really does tie these things together. Like there's almost, this sounds ridiculous, it would be fascinating to talk to somebody who's only seen House of the Dragon and knew nothing of Game of Thrones, especially maybe at the end of House of the Dragon, because none of this prophecy stuff may pay off in any way in this show, right? It seemingly can't pay off in this show. So it'd be really fascinating to see how they take it. But it does tie the world together. It does tie so many things together. Martin, apologies, Patman, for saying this, may never finish those last two books that he intends in the main Song of Ice and Fire series, right? And so some of the things that are mysteries currently in the Song of Ice and Fire book series is Rhaegar, as we heard in the original series, this character who was dead before the original series began, but we heard, he used to go sing in the streets of King's Landing. He would do this and do that. And then he thought, oh, now I need to be a fighter. I need to do this. I need to do these things. And we always heard, well, Aegon found out something that said, hey, I've got to go fight and I've got to do these things. To me, what it does is it answers that question. Aegon found the dagger. The dagger was in some fire, and Aegon found out about the prophecy. That's why a prince who was, going to inherit the Mad King's stuff, suddenly he's like, oh, I can't go sing in the streets. I got to be a fighter because there's this war that's going to come. Like, it answers some questions that are kind of interesting. And so, listeners, we're going to give you a bonus question, and that is, right now, this dagger, which has the prophecy of ice and fire engraved on it, Aemond One Eye carries it. He's got it. We know. So at the end of season 2, he's got it. We know that the next time in history, we know we definitely are going to see it, is when the assassin tries to kill Bran Stark in episode 2 of season 1 of Game of Thrones. So my question to you, listeners, and Catfish and I are going to do it. Where will the dagger be at the end of House of the Dragon? And since this show that we mentioned before, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, it technically takes place in the timeline between House of the Dragons and Game of Thrones, are we going to see this dagger in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms? So, Catfish, who do you think is going to have this dagger when the whole show is done?
All right, Bubba.
Let's hear it.
Bubba, listen to me very carefully.
Okay.
Because I think I have got this right.
Let's hear it.
It is going to be Mysaria going to pass it off to a. It's gonna stay in the hands of brothels until our boy till our boy gets his hands on it
I
because
love
it
that.
gets passed through the brothels.
I love that. Now, just for those playing along at home, if track the dagger, King Viserys has it in the first episode. When he shows it, hands it to Rhaenyra, so Rhaenyra has held it, but she gave it back to him. He dies. That dagger immediately goes to King Aegon II. He gets toasted in the 4th episode here of season 2. Aemon picks it up. Aemon's got it now. I love, as crazy as it sounds, I love that Mysaria gets it. That could answer certain questions people have about, well, how does Melisandre know about this exact same prophecy, which is on this dagger 200 years in the future? So if Mysaria takes it to all the places she got her accent from, that could make a lot.
She could go everywhere.
But listeners, hey, let's hear it. Of course, this show could end with, Aemond on the throne, Aemond winning, and he's the one. And so he just passes it down to any kids he may have. Listeners, let's hear it. Let's have your predictions now. We're 16 episodes before the end. Where will this dagger with the prophecy be when all is said and done? Catfish, though, I should go even further. We know Rhaegar must have seen it, and that's why he stopped singing and decided he had to be a fighter. Of course, before Game of Thrones even starts, Robert has killed Rhaegar. So does Robert take the dagger off Rhaegar when he killed him with the trident? This is some crazy stuff. And then if you haven't been paying attention,
it goes through
Mysaria. I love that. I really do.
That, it ends up
through the brothel.
Through Mysaria.
Littlefinger, that's great. You know what? That actually is great, Catfish. Now, let me say that in Game of Thrones, let's talk about all the people who held the dagger. So the assassin held it. He attacked Bran, but Catelyn Stark stopped him. Then she had the dagger. Sir Roderick Cassel in episode 2 of Game of Thrones, he held it for a brief bit, but he did give it back to Catelyn Stark, who brings it to King's Landing. Varys holds it. Littlefinger holds it. Littlefinger gives it to Ned. Ned gets betrayed. Littlefinger gets the dagger again. He gives it to Bran in season 7. Bran gives it to Arya in season 7. Arya and Brienne fight, and Brienne looks at it for a bit, but of course she gives it back to Arya, and it ends up in the Night King's belly.
All right, Bubba. Well, listen, since this is very important that things flow through the seasons, will this dragon appear in the Duncan Egg show?
Yeah, I think the dagger will appear in the Duncan Eggs show. I think it's crazy, but I think it will. Why not? Every show has the dagger.
This should be, instead of called this Song of Ice and Fire saga, this should be the Dagger saga.
And that's a good name for a fantasy series, right? The Dagger of Prophecy.
Love it. Bubba,
yeah,
you've speculated enough. Let's get to some of our listeners' brilliant answers to the match games we did not get to cover. That's basically why I want to do this podcast, so that we could share your beautiful answers. So here we go, Bubba. I will read the question. You read some of these amazing answers if you would.
Okay, quick.
All right.
Go slow. Where's the bell?
Okay, I'm going to get the bell just in case we need it. I don't know whether any of our listeners will have the same answers, but they should. You know what? Ulf was behaving like he was at the place where the dagger was held. Okay, all right. Now that I'm done. Oh, you still don't know where it is? You just make a dang ding noise with your mouth.
Okay, I will.
All right. Ulf has bad table manners.
How bad are they?
Instead of acting appropriately at the Queen's table, Ulf was behaving like he was at a medieval times bachelor party. That's at Revere Terry.
And guess what? At Kelly Underfoot, she said he was behaving like he was at medieval times with his Ren Fair bros. These are
ding 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 ding. All right, but Harley Camille strikes a dagger into all of our holidays by saying Ulf was behaving like he was at most family Thanksgiving tables. Gen X Cat Mama at All Mod Comes was beautiful when she said Ulf was behaving like he was at Denny's at 3 a.m. in a bad part of town. I'm sorry. Are there any Denny's in good parts of town?
Oh, man.
Right,
everything's served in a skillet.
Dina M. Carson says Ulf was behaving like he was like Cartman asking for cheesy puffs.
That's very specific.
All right, Bubba, we like to stay away from politics here, but our listeners don't sometimes. So here's an answer. Dowager Queen Alicent's behavior in the episode was Well, she presented her kids very recently as Targaryen. Now she's suddenly Hightower. Someone should look into this. Rigged. That was at Revere Terry.
Terrible and brilliant. Hold on, I've got to go back. We've had Denny's family Thanksgiving dinner, and this is Revere Terry imagining Ulf at the NABJ. More like NABKs for the Knights. Oh, anyway, okay, let's continue. Dowager Queen Alicent's behavior in this episode was a magnificent example of incompetence and cluelessness for a dowager queen and or a mother. Ouch. This is not trying to be funny. This is trying to be stone cold brutal from Gen X cat mom. Ouch. Ouch.
All right. And Harley Camille says Dowager Queen Alicent behavior in this episode was backpedaling. She was backpedaling as fast as she can.
Yeah. Back to episode 3. Hey, remember how you wanted peace? Now, my boy, Criston Cole, believes his army is marching towards their annihilation. The Maesters hope to improve his attitude by encouraging him to
reread his oath carefully. Eyebrow wiggle. That is Kelly Underfoot. And Camille Harley comes in again by saying the Maesters hope to improve Sir Criston Cole's attitude by encouraging him to engage in some social emotional learning.
Okay, now Gen X cat mom coming off the top ropes with this one. She says the Maesters hope to improve his attitude by encouraging him to keep a stiff upper lip, staying prepared for the next time Alicent needs a meeting. Inappropriate.
Yes, and at Revere Terry says the Maesters hope to improve his attitude by encouraging him to turn that frown upside down before he becomes Sir Crispy Cole.
Aww. Actually, I think that's a ding, 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 ding. I think somebody said Crispy Cole too. Listeners, This is incredible. We're going to get to some spoiler talk, but first, for your great match game answers, for your great feedback, we've got to reward you with the grand prize, Catfish.
Love it, Bubba. I love it. I don't even know how we're going to do this grand prize. There are so many, many, many people.
Yes. Now, Catfish, we may have lost some. I want to be completely honest. We always try to. Well, we get so much feedback. Sometimes it's hard to.
It's true.
It's hard to. So we have a list of round up about 45 to 50 names here.
Damn.
And so what we're going to do is Catfish has a number generator, random number generator.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
So he's going to put these numbers into the random number generator. If he calls a certain number and it lines up with where your name is on this spreadsheet, you're going to be our grand prize winner. And all of you deserve lots of, to be honest, you all deserve prizes for these great match games, these great feedback. It has been a great season 2 of the podcast because of you.
All right, Bubba, I'm going to read the number and you'll read the name, right?
I will.
All right, the number is 5.
Whoa. Oh, my goodness gracious. Well, Catfish, this is wonderful and heartbreaking because I think this person has won before. But hey, that's the way it goes. Do you see who number 5 is? It's our good friend at Nicholas Fortuna. Nick Fortuna.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. I love it. I love it.
You had a 1 in 50 chance and you won again, Nick. This is incredible.
I mean, you know what? That's, well, I mean, he's aptly named. Fortuna.
He is. All right, we are going to go to some spoiler talk. It's going to begin with what we call slight spoiler talk and then get deeper into spoiler talk. So I think I'll just say this first part, and then you can decide if you want to, if that sounds interesting and slight enough for your spoiler take. So this first slight spoiler talk we're talking about is currently Discovery still owns HBO, Time Warner, all this stuff. And they've pretty much said, you're not going back to 10 episodes. It's 8 episodes. If there are 2 more seasons left of 8 episodes each, that's 16 episodes left in the show. Okay. 16 episodes left.
Whoa.
Now, if you go through the Wiki of Ice and Fire, they have bullet points for this, Dance of the Dragons, this Targaryen Civil War. And in the bullet points, so far, there are 18 remaining bullet points of these are important things that happen in this Targaryen Civil War. 18 bullet points remaining, but only 16 episodes left. That's the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about right here at first. If that sounds interesting to you, we are going to talk about those bullet points in very kind of general terms. But if that sounds too spoiler for you, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. And please join us on all our crazy endeavors until it shows up. Catfish, does that sound too spoilery for you, or are you okay to continue?
I mean, I'll continue only because I spoiled myself a little bit by seeing what was going on. But I did correct your math here.
You did. Okay. So looking over these 18 bullet points that remain, according to the Wiki of Ice and Fire, in this Targaryen Civil War, the tricky point is not only are there more bullet points than there are episodes remaining, but it's also how do you build it into kind of a natural episode of television?
Nothing but bangers.
Nothing but bangers, but I'm actually going to go to the final three. So the final three bullet points are kind of like, okay, this Civil War happened, and this is kind of where it ended up. And so I'm saying, well, maybe you take these final three bullet points. Now, they're important bullet points, but maybe you put them all in the final episode, a bit like the final episode of Game of Thrones not only had Jon stabbing Daenerys, but also had the kingdoms deciding, well, what are we going to do going forward? And then kind of, figuring out where everybody's going to end up. And so that could make the final episode of House of the Dragon kind of filled with a lot of stuff, but it feels like that's kind of naturally how you have to do it. It's like, just stick it all in the final episode so you don't have to spend an episode, okay, this person ended up here, this person ended up here. It will make it maybe feel like shorthand, but I think you kind of have to do it. When that gets you to 15 bullet points over 15 episodes. So, okay, we got it from 18 and 16 episodes down to 15 bullet points in 15 episodes. Now, a lot of the times, this is a civil war. Not always, but a lot of these bullet points are what I would call battles, right? Like, they're not all, but a lot are. And so the question becomes, Catfish, in Game of Thrones, especially in season 1, there were two big battles. You didn't see either of them, right? Like, there were a lot of battles that technically happened in season 2, but you only saw the Battle of the Blackwater, really.
I mean, hell, Bubba, in Shogun, we didn't see very many battles at all. A lot of them were hand-waved. And look, I mean, battles are great. We love battles, but you can't do them one after another. You can just hand wave away some battles, because what we really love is the intrigue. Now, again, I mean, some of the Game of Thrones battles were the best kind of medieval battles I've ever seen. So you can't skip over all of them. But I would say, well, Bubba, I just kind of spoiled myself for major events. But my question to you is, are some of these battles sort of turn the tide of war? But if none of our main characters get killed in them, it seems like those could be elided over.
Catfish, you are going exactly where I'm going, in that there are battles that maybe you show the beginning and end of, which Game of Thrones always did. Like, hey, here's Robb starting to attack. Cut to the next morning, Robb has won the battle. That happens in season 2. And I think you can do that with a handful of them, but there are a lot of deaths in these battles, and I think you do kind of have to show the whole battle if somebody's death is going to have the emotional hit that it requires. And some, for lack of a better word, even if there isn't a death in the battle, is just so important. I think it's going to take up what I call an episode. So if you remember the Hardhome episode of Game of Thrones in season 5, the whole episode wasn't the battle at Hardhome. But that pretty much took up a lot of the episode, and that's kind of what everybody remembers from that episode entitled Hardhome, is the Battle of Hardhome. So I broke it down into, hey, is this going to take up an episode? Like, is this like Hardhome where it has to take up a whole episode, or is this something where you go show the beginning and end and then just yada, yada, yada for it? Then there's also the trick of, okay, where would you put this battle? So, for example, I'm just going to name the battle. I'm not going to say what happens in them, listeners, if you're still kind of listening for light spoilers. Technically, the next two battles that happen are this one battle called the Battle of the Gullet. And then after that, there's a thing called the Battle of the Honeywine. Because I think most readers would agree, there's more kind of lasting importance in emotional kind of punches in the first battle of the Gullet than there is in the Battle of the Honeywine. I think if I'm the show, I would actually flip the order of them. Why am I saying that? When you start a new season 3, episode 1, you need to do things that you maybe think are unimportant, but as a TV show, you do need to reintroduce all these characters. You need to say, hey, remember this, remember this, remember this, so that when things happen to them, either good or bad, the emotion kind of comes through. And so the next battle being kind of the one that has the most emotional punch into it, I wouldn't put that in the first episode of season 3. Now, I admittedly only move it back to the second episode, but I think that gives you time to kind of work everybody back into the world of House of the Dragon and get them reconnected to the characters. And you spend, maybe 60 minutes in the first episode doing technically the battle that happens later in the books, the Battle of the Honeywine. Have that, kind of the beginning of the battle, end of the battle, what happened, the results of the battle in the first episode of season 3. But then in the second one, you have this one, which is going to have some emotional punch in it. So that's my thought, is rearrange them, just because you want the ones with emotional punch, they kind of need to be built up to. So that's how I would do the first 2 episodes. The next battle, so we talked about this one battle called the Gullet, this one battle called the Honeywine. The next bullet point is another battle, called the Red Fork and the Fish Feed. I put that as just, you show the beginning of it, show the end results of it, put that in the 3rd episode of season 3. So once again, Catfish, you're talking about bangers. In my first 3 episodes of season 3, I've got 3 different battles. Admittedly, I only show one of them, but it's like battle, battle, battle. And I think you need that kind of pace to get through this whole story. Does that sound exciting to you, or like, hey, this is too much?
Yeah, no, I love it. Let's do it.
So because there are only 8 episodes, so I've had we've had 3 battles in 3 episodes. The next thing that kind of happens is not necessarily a battle, but it's called the fall of this place. A place falls, it's, on Team Black and it falls to green, or it's green and it falls to black. And that, I think you do need a whole episode on. So that's taken up episode 4. So here I am. I'm halfway through the season.
I definitely know, Bubba. I don't know what it is, but I know it's not Harrenhal, because that place has already fallen.
You Catfish. We're going to go to Redfin and we're going to look up the value of Harrenhal, and we're going to buy it low and sell it high after we remodel it. Okay.
Going to be a lot of shiplap in there, as you said.
So listeners, if you don't know these spoilers, hopefully this isn't much spoiler. Listeners, if you do know all the spoilers, you know what the first fall is. So I'm putting that in the middle, episode 4 of season 3. There's this stuff that happens with this character called the Red Kraken. We've never seen the Red Kraken. He's been mentioned. He's obviously a Greyjoy because he's a Kraken. And so I think there's a chance, it's a bullet point here on the Wiki of Ice and Fire, but I think there's a chance you never show this bullet point. So here I'm cutting a bullet point entirely, the Red Kraken. Maybe you say what the Red Kraken, this Greyjoy, is doing, but because of its overall lack of importance on the overall battle, I think maybe you don't show it. So I'm actually cutting the bullet point entitled the Red Kraken.
All right.
Get rid of it. The next battle is
Wait, if you're cutting it, don't you get that episode? Now you got that episode back.
I do have that episode back, so I'm really in the 5th episode of season 3. I'm pretty much continuing with, okay, this one location which was on one side got taken over by the other side. I'm going to have episode 5 of season 3 just kind of, hey, let's look at the board as it is now that these situations have flipped side. But of course, the next battle is titled the Butcher's Ball, and that is one where you maybe don't show the whole battle, but if you know the spoilers, there's an important death. Well, I'll just say it like this. There's an important death in this battle. So you do have to kind of dedicate a lot of time to it. So I'm going to stick that in season 3, episode 6. So here we go. We've gone through 6 episodes. I've had 4 battles in a location flip from team one to team other. There's a next battle called First Tumbleton, and so I'm putting that in episode 7. I do think you have to show the whole battle. It's like, this is so tough. So listeners, So listeners, let's go through it. I'm getting too crazy. Hopefully you know. So the first episode of season 3, I'm doing the Battle of the Honey Wine. The second episode of season 3, I'm doing the Battle of the Gullet, and you got to show the whole battle. The third episode of season 3, I'm just showing, kind of little bits of the Red Fork battle and the fish feed battle. The fourth episode of season 3, I'm showing this one location which falls from one side to the other. I'm not going to show the Red Kraken.
So you get a free episode 5.
Free episode 5. Episode 6, I'm not going to show the battle, but I got to spend a lot of time on the character who falls in Butcher's battle. So that's episode 6 of season 3. I think the penultimate episode should be the battle called First Tumbleton, and I'm going to spend episode 7 pretty much showing that battle. Then in episode 8, here's where I'm going to do something really big. No, episode 8. So I've already stuck who knows how many battles into season 3. I think there's this battle called Battle Above the Blank Blank. Listeners, if you know spoilers, you know what that is. You can either do it at the end of season 3, the final episode of season 3, or you have to stick it into season 4. Why I'm encouraging to stick this battle above the God's Eye into the end of season 3 is because I think there's so much more you need to get through. And so, yes, this is a giant battle, and there are losses that are really going to shake the foundation of the show. And it would, maybe you don't want to do that until season 4, but there's so much more to do. I think it's an incredible way to end the season. So I'm sticking the Battle Above the God's Eye in the final episode of season 3.
Battle Above God's Eye. Yep. Okay. All right. So now we go into season 4. What do we have?
So once again, there's something that technically happens between the First Tumbleton battle and the Battle Above the God's Eye. Because I cut it from season 3, that's how I open season 4, is another location on the map switches who controls it. And you don't show the whole battle, but you got to show this location switching hands. Then I'm having nothing happening in no battle per se, no bullet point per se in the second episode of season 4.
Look at that. You're just throwing away bullet points. You got so much extra, you could throw it away, okay?
But for the third episode of season 4, there's a thing called the Storming of the Dragon Pit. And if you know about this, listeners, you know how big this is. It needs to take up a whole episode. So it may technically not be a battle, but I think where I'm putting that is in the third episode of season 4. Once again, people may say, boy, that really feels early, but it's just you've got so much more to get through if you kind of want to tell a complete story. Then I don't have another bullet point in season 4, episode 4, but season 4, episode 5, I have the second Tumbleton battle.
Okay.
Where once again, crazy as it sounds, you've got to spend a whole lot of time on this and a whole lot of money on this. And so, can you do it? Season 4, episode 6, I once again am trying to save budget, so I don't have a battle there. But this does come to what you call the giant deaths in this. Like a lot of times, listeners, when you think what really ended, like if you don't think about it, looking at these bullet points like I do, if I went to these listeners who've read the book and I said, what really signifies the end of this Targaryen civil war, it'd say, oh, this person's death. And in a lot of ways it does, but so much happens after this person's death, it's where does it fall in the show? It feels like you want to put it at least in season 4, episode 6, so you can have 2 more episodes to deal with all the fallout. But because even though it isn't technically the end of the battle, I move it to episode 7, which means you're going to have the biggest cramming of episode 8 you've ever seen. So this character's death, the one they mentioned in Game of Thrones, our character King Joffrey talks about it in Game of Thrones. I'm having that in the penultimate episode of season 4, episode 7.
So you have got now 6 bullet points
Say it,
that
Catfish.
You are cramming into one episode, Bubba.
Is this crazy? So that's right.
So the final episode is going to be all montage.
I think it might have to. So if you look at the 18 bullet points, I told you, well, I'll stick the final 3 in the final episode. No.
But then
when I broke it down into how would a season of television go, I'm ending up sticking 6 of the 18 bullet points into the very last episode.
Oh my
Season
God.
4, episode 8. Is that ridiculous? But kind of, if you logically, you know, like if you were doing this in a book, you wouldn't do it because, you know, that's 6 bullet points you got to get through. I am
You
saying,
can't
okay,
do it, Bubba. You got a
let's race
couple
through them all.
episodes. You got a couple episodes in season 4 that you're leaving blank, and it's not possible. You got to move some of these things to the blank episodes so we can spread out these last 6 bullet points over 2 episodes.
Okay, so listeners, if you know these bullet points, and I pretty much said them all, I didn't say the character's death.
Read the last 6, though. Read the last 6.
Okay, so this one character's death I'm putting in the penultimate episode of season 4. What that means is that in the final episode, you're going to have the Moon of the Three Kings, the Battle of the King's Road. Now, both of those are very important, but I do think you can kind of yada yada them just by showing a beginning and end or saying, oh, look what happened. Now, this other character's death, it's also going to have to fall logically in the timeline in that final episode. Then kind of where do all the final pieces end up are these final 3 bullet points. It's the false dawn, the hour of the wolf, and the regency of blank, aka the person who ends up on the throne after all this happens. So that is 6 bullet points. The Moon of the Three Kings, the Battle of the King's Road, this other character who, if you read the books, knows death, the false dawn, the hour of the wolf, and then putting this final person on the throne who's going to...
But not knowing any of these things, knowing what any of these things mean really and what they entail.
Yeah.
You got 2 episodes where nothing is happening in season 4, and I'm just shocked that you want to cram 1/3 of the final bullet points in one of the remaining 16 episodes.
Okay, well, let me describe it like this, Catfish. This isn't in any way correlation. This is kind of look at it this way. King's Landing fell in the penultimate episode of season 8, right? Cersei was dethroned. Cersei died. Cersei was killed. Daenerys took over King's Landing. Like that happened in the penultimate episode. And even though so much stuff happened in the final episode, like say there was a lot more things to do than the final episode of Game of Thrones. But like the biggest thing was still, hey, Cersei was overthrown, Daenerys burned down King's Landing. Like this event that I push all the way to season 4, episode 7, to me, it's like the equivalent of King's Landing falling. And so the problem is like that's the penultimate thing, but technically to get you to kind of a complete story, 6 other things have to happen. So were you willing to put the falling of King's Landing into the middle of season 8 and then kind of have everything that happens after it not be as big?
Well, again, I don't know because I only know that they're bullet points and I don't know how much heft they have. But it still seems to me that I thought you were going to have hard time, but now you got episodes where it's just people are just dicking around for 2 episodes.
Well, Catfish, I'm also losing money hand over fist at Discovery Time Warner. What do you want me to do? I'm pretty sure 4 battles at least.
Listen, you're saving all this. You're saving all this money on the NBA. You got to put it somewhere.
All right, listeners, if you know these things, go ahead and write to us. And if you're afraid of people seeing a tweet with spoilers in it or a YouTube comment with spoilers in it, you can write to us on our email, hello@doublepmedia.com. That's the word hello at doublepmedia.com. And that way you can talk all the spoiler stuff you want. Now here, this next thing, Catfish, is another thing I consider a light spoiler. So I think you're okay to be here for this next discussion.
Okay, great.
And so, listeners, we're going to talk about a character from the books who's not going to appear in the show, seemingly. And so I assume it's okay to talk about this. So there is, as we saw at the end of season 2, we see these Targaryen bastards, or these people with Valyrian blood, riding dragons. We also saw Rhaenyra looking for this dragon who was eating a lot of sheep. And so we got this feedback from someone named Shaughnessy12, I believe this was on YouTube, but Shaughnessy12, or actually it might have been Threads, excuse me. It was Threads. Shaughnessy12 wrote us and said, free Nettles. So spoiler for a character who doesn't exist, who exists in the books and most likely won't exist on the show. Nettles was a unique character in the book A Fire and Blood, in that Nettles, it was never revealed that she had any Valyrian or Targaryen blood. But what she did, and she might have had Valyrian blood, she might have had Targaryen blood, but it was like nobody knew about it. But this character named Nettles was a young woman, young girl, who started just bringing a sheep to a wild dragon. And she brought a sheep to a wild dragon every day. And this dragon became close with her and let her ride the dragon. And it became this thing of like, oh my goodness, it's not just that you have to have Valyrian blood or you have to be part Targaryen. It was like, this was just a common, lowborn in the world person who got control of a dragon. Now, what the show has done is the show has left many, many hints that they're not going to have a character called Nettles. They're going to have a Rhaenyra do all the things that Nettles did in the book. Now, that said, listeners, if you know the way this works, is Rhaenyra in the TV show, she keeps seeing remains, scorched earth and remains of sheep. And then at the end of season 2, she finds this dragon in the mountains there in the Vale. The show could suddenly have this new character Nettles show up and say, Rhaenyra, oh, hey, Rhaenyra, how you doing? I've been feeding this, this dragon of sheep, and it's my dragon now. So they could introduce the character Nettles in season 3. But all signs hint that, no, there's never going to be a character Nettles on the show. Rhaenyra, this is going to be her storyline. She's going to claim this dragon. So
right.
If you love this character Nettles in the book, you can be very frustrated. And that's why this person on Threads wrote us, Shaughnessy12, and said, free Nettles, we want her on the show. The flip side of it is that if Nettles exists on the show, the character Rhaenyra really doesn't have anything to do. And so that's why a lot of people think they're cutting Nettles, is so that this actress who plays Rhaenyra can have something to do. And so I started thinking about it. So like the young actor who played Rickon Stark, at the end of season 3, he leaves Game of Thrones and he doesn't appear again until season 6 when he has something to do, right? The character Tommen, King Tommen, he's an important character in Game of Thrones, but he didn't appear at all in season 3 because Tommen really didn't do anything in that part of the story. Myrcella left the show in season 2 and didn't appear in season 3 or season 4. The Mountain, a big character of the Mountain. Everybody knows Game of Thrones, the Mountain. He didn't appear at all in season 3. Sir Barristan didn't appear in season 2. Gendry left at the end of season 3, returned in he returned in season 7. The Brotherhood Banners left at season 3, returned in season 6. The Hound wasn't in season 5 at all. Alistair Thorne from The Wall, he left at the end of season 1. He didn't appear again until season 4. And then Otto Hightower barely appears in this season. So Catfish, what do you think? Do you think you could take an actress, you hire an actress to play Rhaenyra in season 1, but she kind of doesn't really have anything to do in the books until the end of the story? Do you create storylines for her? Do you, remove a character from the books and let Rhaenyra do it so the actor has something to do? Or do you do like Game of Thrones did? You literally have an actor off for a season. What do you think is the best rule here? In having described what I just described, that hey, there was this character Nettles who might not have any Valyrian blood, who just got control of a dragon through feeding it sheep. Would you rather see that, or would you rather see Rhaenyra, this character you're invested with, who said, "Oh, I never had a dragon, never had a dragon," her claiming this wild dragon? What do you think the show should do?
At this point, two seasons in, 2 out of 4 halfway through, it really seems like it's better to keep her with Rhaenyra, and they don't seem to trust them that we'll remember somebody gone for a whole season. So maybe we'll just see her a little bit, but if she's really not going to participate in the battles, then that would be awkward to have her around, but deciding she's just going to chill a little bit before she joins things.
Well, Catfish, you are getting to something that actually I think ties into all this. If you remember me trying to take the bullet points and plot out this storyline, Nettles, this girl who in the book trains this dragon through feeding it sheep, Nettles actually takes place in the next battle chronologically, the Battle of the Gullet. And so if Rhaenyra's going to claim this dragon, is she going to claim the dragon? Well, I suppose she could claim it in season 3, episode 1, and then you stick the battle in season 3, episode 1, or do you do like I do? You move the battle to episode 2 of season 3, so Rhaenyra has a full episode of learning how to fly it. It's a tough question. Listeners, I want to know what you think.
But if this dragon is going to participate very soon, then you're not talking about them leaving for, I thought you were concerned that she didn't have anything to do until like season 4, but it sounds like that is not the case.
Well, Nettles and the dragon participate in the next battle. If Nettles becomes Rhaenyra, who has nothing to do in the story from the book until the end of season 4, suddenly Rhaenyra would have to claim this dragon and appear in the next chronological battle. So
why not?
Listeners, I want you to know, did you love Nettles in the books? Do you like Rhaenyra? How do you feel? Know that there is a way you could read the book. I suppose I should add this caveat too. There is a way you could squint and read the book and say, well, the maester who put this history together didn't realize that Nettles was the person they thought was Nettles is Rhaenyra. Like there is a way you could maybe squint and see that, because Nettles may have like a father-daughter type relationship with Daemon in the book. And so they're like, well, what if we just make him Nettles actually Rhaenyra, Daemon's actual daughter? I mean,
but that sounds like you're trying to have it both ways. That would be as ridiculous as rooting for 2 football teams.
Oh! All right, listeners, we're going to have just a couple more of the what I call light spoiler discussions, and we're going to have to get to real spoiler discussions. So, Catfish, how did you feel about Daemon's storyline this year? Because there is a way you can read this story, and I was just listing all the bullet points. There's a way you could read this story, and it's like you could read it and maybe say you could go through season 3 and Daemon also not really have much to do. Like, in fact, that's a lot of the way you could read it. Like season 2, you may not have had much to do hanging out at Harrenhal, but you can read the history, and in some ways you could read it as like, boy, Daemon doesn't do anything in these first 8 bullet points either. So what do you do?
What is he doing? What is he doing dicking around? These are fights. He and his dragon need to be part of these fights. I can't see how they can push him off this year. He's got to be involved. They can't have him do another to be or not to be season. So he's got to be involved.
Well, listeners,
maybe what if Bubba, he gets hurt and is like
that's actually not a bad idea.
On the IR for like 5-6 episodes.
Catfish, that's actually not a bad idea. But I'm just saying, if you look at the next 8 bullet points, Daemon is relatively involved in one of those locations that I talked about that fell from one side to another. But otherwise, in the next 8 bullet points, he's not really involved, Catfish. He's not in any of those battles.
I mean, this is the problem when you take something that is where the George R. R. Martin's like Wikipedia and try to change it into a story. Like, it just doesn't make any sense for Daemon, once he's bent the knee, to not be involved.
Well, he bent the knee at the end of season 1, then kind of spent season 2 not being involved.
They can't do that again, Bubba.
Well, listeners who've read the books, this is where I want you to email us, hello@doublepmedia.com. What can you do with Daemon? How much can you how much from George Martin's sacred text can you go? Because again, there is a way to read it, and if all those bullet points in season 3, admittedly, I moved one into season 3 that maybe chronologically would happen in season 4, but it's like he wouldn't have anything to do, man. Like, there's a chance that Daemon has nothing to do.
No, he's going to be doing shit.
All righty. Now, listeners, here's where we begin to get into more spoilery stuff, because there's no way that I can talk around it. So if you've somehow stuck around in what I've been calling kind of light spoilery stuff, and hopefully you felt like it's been light spoilery stuff, thank you so much, and we understand you leaving. But here's where we're going to have to really get into the heart of the matter, and I think some of the writer challenges of this show. I don't mention it too often, but I have sold a script. It became a, sadly, very
just
poor
every
movie.
Episode.
Right, but I did sell a script, and so one thing that I mentioned a lot when we talked about Game of Thrones, especially the final end of Game of Thrones, and that is George R. R. Martin wrote this quote for his third book in the series, A Storm of Swords, where he said, "There is a savage beast in every man, and when you hand that man a sword or a spear and send him forth to war, the beast stirs." So this is his kind of point. Like anybody with a weapon, you're going to stir that beast within them. You give them a dragon, that could stir a whole lot of beast. You know what I mean? And so the one question that the show has really, to me, feels like it could be setting up the exact same thing that Game of Thrones went to. Where, once again, I'm trying to keep this as light a spoiler for Catfish as possible, but Rhaenyra is going to start doing some violent things. Like, would you say Rhaenyra has been very violent in the first 2 seasons?
Well, no, except as you noted, she went from caring about innocent people being killed to, well, that's just
price of war.
Tough. That's just, you know what? I mean, don't be an arse kettle. Just just get in there and kill.
If Rhaenyra starts having to do kind of more violent solutions, has to go to war and do violent things in war, how do you do that without seemingly taking this character who's a bit like Daenerys, like a lovable hero, and have a hero do really, I'm not going to say she's obviously not going to be a full Daenerys and burn down King's Landing, but she's going to have to do some violent stuff. Do you think that they've built enough into the character so if she starts doing violent stuff, the audience will understand and go with it, Catfish? What do you think?
Well, you know what, Bubba? It just occurred to me that this maybe relates to our earlier discussion, and this is why George R. R. Martin insisted on tying the prophecy to A Song of Ice and Fire, is that if she believes the entire, and keeps mentioning the entire future is at stake, then that is a reason to sort of an excuse for her to try to win the war at all costs.
Right. And then, but do you think the audience, which kind of loves Rhaenyra, I'm just assuming, listeners tell me if you think that's a wrong read, but it feels like just like the audience of Game of Thrones loved Daenerys. And even if the show did it clunky, even if it had been done perfectly, I'm not sure anybody would have loved Daenerys turning as violent as she did.
The only thing you have to do is you have to keep her emphasizing that she is the only one who can save us. I alone can keep Westeros safe from the White Walkers. Again, I think you're right though. If this is going to go bad again, this is going to be a discussion again, and people are going to be very, very unhappy.
Yeah, I worry about that. Now, admittedly, they didn't have the book to fall back on Game of Thrones to say, all those people hadn't been primed by the book. Like if the Game of Thrones novels were complete and all the readers had read ahead of time, hey, Daenerys is going to do this, they would have been prepared for it and maybe, would have at least kind of gone there easier than they did.
I mean,
here they've got the books, which, say what you want to about this Wikipedia Fire and Blood that you keep mentioning, Catfish. It kind of states.
Okay, well, that doesn't.
Daenerys' fate. So that's not going to shock anybody.
That still doesn't help. Really,
no,
I mean, if you're talking about like, all right, these dudes are, we had these 2 dude showrunners and they did this, and then we've still got a dude who's doing it again. It doesn't matter whether it has the book stopped. I think the only thing you can do is you've got to make the Greens worse. They have got to do. They have also got to like lose their minds. And so you've got 2 sets of people who just don't care, but at least one of them, it's not a pure power move. It's a belief that
there's this prophecy. Yeah.
Only I can save you.
Listeners, if you have read Fire and Blood and know the places Rhaenyra's going to go to and the parallels that are going to come up with her and Daenerys, how will you react to that? How did you react to that when you read the books? How do you think show watchers will react when these parallels start coming up really kind of strongly, just because they will, just because they kind of have to come up strongly? So let's hear it.
What if they try to do at least a little thing, like a little Dr. Seussian, the places you'll go to madness and killing innocents and like that.
Well, it is a war. See, this is the way you could say it is that this is a war of equal powers. Like Daenerys was so much more powerful than the people she was fighting. They surrendered and she still went the final
right,
step.
Except when Rhaenyra decides to attack in this last season, where there's like, I'm just going to attack these innocents. Yeah. They are unequal at this point.
That's correct. And so
the blacks have a lot more power.
It's going to be interesting. I hope everybody's ready for this, but there are going to be, like I said, this violence that's has to come from Rhaenyra. Like they keep changing the motivations of the books on a lot of this stuff. Like, whoops, it was an accident. Oh, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. At a certain point, you're not going to be able to get away with the whoops, all violence. Whoops, all violence options for Rhaenyra especially. And once again, she's been presented as our hero, or the person who was named by their father, who is getting their inheritance stolen.
Right.
But two wrongs don't make a right. And that's in Rhaenyra season 4. It'll be very interesting to see how the audience react to the, these are tragedies in a lot of ways. And so the tragedy that is coming.
I mean, here's the thing so far. Here's another thing you can do. I mean, who has been the baddie for most of the stuff we've seen in the Black so far? This answers your question. What does Daemon have to do in season 3? All the terrible shit. Make Daemon
there you go.
Do all the terrible shit.
He's got to do something. That's a good point. Okay, that's pretty good. The final thing, listeners, is I'm just going to open it up to you book readers again. And that is, where do you end the story? So Game of Thrones, I think, did need to get us to Arya sailing, the Sunset Sea, Sansa sitting on the,
All right, Bubba. Well, I'm going to bow out at this point because I think this is going to be the serious spoilers.
All right. Well, Catfish, tell everybody how they can yell at you on social media, and then I'll continue for a bit.
They can hit me up at G to the Man on Instagram and Blue Sky. And they can talk to me next time on, I'm just going to say it, the Joffrey of podcast.
How dare you? Thank you, Catfish. All right, big spoilers, so we're going to say goodbye to Catfish. Okay, if you've been listening to Catfish and I's conversation, you may be thinking, Bubba, what are you talking about, Rhaenyra going so evil? And this was a bit where I wasn't sure how far I could go into the spoilers with non-book reader Catfish. So Rhaenyra in Fire and Blood does do a lot of evil things, but as we've seen, this book could be spin and written from a pro-green perspective. But the one thing that is definite is Game of Thrones pretty much ended with Daenerys' death. And based on the way I've outlined season 4, I really think House of the Dragon is also going to end with Rhaenyra's death. Rhaenyra's murder. Daenerys was murdered. And so how is the audience going to feel when in both cases the main female empowerment figure ends dead? Like, that's how both stories end. I think at a certain point people are going to be like, why do I keep reading this when my empowering female figure gets murdered at the end? I'm not sure how you get around that. I want to know your thoughts. So use that email, hello@doublepmedia.com, and let's talk through it. Again, I have no idea what the right answer to this is, but I know the writers have to come up with an answer to it. Maybe you don't think it's important. Maybe you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. But that parallel of our story's over once somebody kills the blonde lady, going to be odd to see how it plays out with the fandom. All right. hello@doublepmedia.com. Thank you guys so much. We love you, listeners, and you're the reason why we do this podcast.